So today we are looking at lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. I thought I would do what I do every time I prepare a sermon and read a scripture. First thing I do is look at the scripture and I say, okay, what do I notice about what I'm reading? And then what questions do I have? So I wondered, when you see lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, what do you notice?
Us.
Us. Yeah, one's capitalized and one isn't.
Us got left out.
Lead.
Lead us not into temptation.
Oh.
What's your question about it?
That one. No. Well,
Oh,
the implication is that God is there to using the term lead reminds me of like a coach leading his team or whatever.
right.
It's not.
It sounds like it's
Not
saying
given-
God's going to tempt us. Or
Yeah,
he is going
give
to-
us the strength to resist evil or temptations. It's lead us.
That's good.
Yeah.
One of the things that the commentaries will say, lead us not into temptation. It's not that God is going to set us up for temptation. It's that it's a rhetorical way of saying, don't lead us, don't protect us from being into evil. I think it's an awkward way of
Great.
saying.
Yeah.
I've never felt like it that's true.
It's a double negative almost.
Right, it's almost a double negative.
Yeah.
Is temptation evil?
Is temptation evil? No,
Is it evil?
that's a great question. But in traditional theology, temptation itself is not evil. To be tempted is human. Jesus was tempted.
Yeah.
So,
Well, they're together.
Somebody else?
The connotation is though you're being tempted to doing something that's not
Just a sidebar on it,
good.
isn't it typical of, pardon, husky throat. Typically in the Psalms and scriptural writings, that there's always two aspects of every phrase.
two aspects in the phrase.
Like,
Yeah.
There's always a duality going.
There is
in.
sometimes it's repetitive, sometimes it will repeat. And actually, if you have four sentences, the first corresponds to the last, the middle correspond to each other, and that's called a chiastic structure. Which
There's
I
always
won't
a
go
pair
into.
going on.
But yeah, so it's a repetitiveness, so it wants to get the meaning in different words.
Mhm.
This doesn't have that repetitiveness, but it does have the two sentence part.
Well, it sort of does a lead us and then deliver us.
And lead us not to temptation, but deliver. So I guess it does have the parallel.
Yeah.
It does have the parallel meaning.
But why is us capitalized on the first time?
Well, maybe that's.
That's just me. I just capitalized. I noticed that it is us
Right,
Yeah.
not personal.
because it is in keeping with the rest of the prayer. And do not lead us as a community, as a people of followers of yours. It's prayed for the church and for those who follow the way of Christ. So I'm going to throw something else at you. Here's the other ways of the verse being said. Now look at this. Lead us not into, this is the other way, this is probably a better translation. Lead us not into a temptation, into a time of trial, but deliver us from the evil one. That's different in tone.
Right.
It's not just about temptation, it's about time where our faith would be tried.
It's like Jesus in the wilderness.
Right, like Jesus, exactly. Lead us not into that time of trial. So, but deliver us not just from the evil. To translate the word, the Greek word here can also mean the evil one or Satan, which is an interesting thing. Now, one of the commentaries said, yeah, it is about a time of trial, but you could also say that it's also a time about personal temptation. It can encompass it both. So you could say it both ways, and so it's an option it's often starred and put in the footnotes in some of the Bibles.
Did the Jewish people at that time believe in Satan? Or was
Yes,
this
I think
something
most
interjected
people
later?
in Judaism believed in a power that is opposed to God's righteousness. Now, how they personify it like they do God, but when we personify God, do we think of God as really like a human being? Not really, right? So.
This concerns me, even though that usually concerns me, because we may call ourselves Christians and have the faith that Jesus demonstrated for us, but we're going to have times of trial. We're going to be, there are going to be times when
Right.
there's a problem, and what we need to ask God for is the strength when that happens, not to fall into the hole.
It's the strength to resist. Right, it's the strength to resist. It is.
But sometimes that's just imposed upon you, a trial, like an illness in a family or
Well,
whatever.
now, I'm getting ahead of myself, but one of the things that the commentary tells us is that when you read the commentaries, is that to follow the way of Christ is to bring trial upon us. We're going to spend most of the session talking about that fact. And we don't, as modern Christians, we sometimes think nicely about our faith, and we don't see ourselves exposed to the world and culture in the way they did. Larry, you had.
Well, God created us with free will.
Right.
So maybe the temptation is part of strengthening, testing the free will to do.
Could
Right.
bring strength.
Mhm.
Well, some of us could probably name times when we were tried by something and working it through did cause us to feel stronger.
Mhm.
Right.
But so what's wrong with being led into a time of trial when you know you have the support to just not fall for that?
Or to get through it.
Yeah, how to get through it, yeah. Okay, so we all have time.
And I think most people would say in Christian theology, and the greatest teachers would say it's prayer and it's community and support from the community get us through a time of being tested. And that testing may not just be something to do something wrong. It could be the questions and the struggles we have to give the faith up too.
I think people who, like I have a friend who doesn't really believe, she doesn't have a faith.
Right.
Because she says there wouldn't be all this evil in the world, and your child wouldn't die or this kind of thing. But my answer always is, there is a God. If you get through that, that was God helping you get through this thing that you think you can't handle.
Right. So and there are a lot of people, that's the core question for people who are challenged in their faith is why is there suffering? Why do good people suffer?
Mhm.
And, if you say that, that's a whole other year.
Yeah, that doesn't cause.
But-
people. It's
But it
there.
really is the core question. I'd love to we probably ought to, I'm sure you studied it before. We ought to look at Job or something like that and get into that question. And depends on how you see the creation itself. Is death and destruction part of the creation itself? Is pain and death part of the creation itself? Was it designed like that, or is it as Paul would probably say, well, it was the fall, our fallen. You know, I'm more of the heretical one than the first one. But that's a whole other question. No, what is the nature of evil? Do you have this idea? What do you think about the idea of the devil?
Well, it's just a way to personify, or what's the word, to humanize or whatever, the challenges that we all face that are either inherent in us being of body and mind. It makes it simpler to think about
Right.
evil as opposed to.
It gives us a
very
way to
complex
talk about it.
forces. Yeah.
Now, for ancient people, they believed that there were forces at work in the world that work against us. And I also believe that. I don't think in terms of the pitchfork devil. I've got a painting of Jesus' temptation that a naive painting that someone did in my office, and you can look at it, and he looks like a voodoo king or queen. You know, but is there evil inside the creation? And see, Zoroastrianism believed that there was.
Could you,
Yeah. Go ahead, Jess.
that's all right, go ahead.
Zoroastrianism believed that there are two opposing forces of equal power. One was good and one was evil. Some Christian heresies early in the church started to think that way too. And Augustine kind of settled it by saying evil does not exist in and of itself. It exists as that which preys on the good. The negation of the good is evil. So I kind of like that philosophical idea. It's probably one of the better things he said, better than the original sin in my book.
Not everything.
But the idea that there is in this world something eating away at the good is something we all can relate to. And I want to get into that.
But is good individual? Is it communal? Is it societal? Is it world? I mean, there are all these circles around which you can define your concern.
Is it-
varies?
I agree. I have another question. Is it negation or the absence of good? I mean, is there a force working against good, or is there an absence of good?
It is.
Because I think that there's.
It is the negation is that which destroys what God made good. So it is something that, like I say, eats away is what I think of. It's something that is negating. It's not in and of itself a power. It only exists through us. Only exists as much energy as we give it, or the world gives it. Now, somehow this slide's not coming up right. So rather than fighting with it,
But you just read it for us.
I'm gonna read it for you.
You might want to get rid of the bottom right thing,
Yeah.
to get rid of the Windows update opportunity
Oh, yeah.
What's that? Yeah.
Go click the X down there.
down at the
On
bottom.
the right.
Somehow
There
this
you go.
mouse is very hard to work.
Yeah,
We're gonna
Especially
cut off
with the
the
left
tail
Need those. Ads. Terrible.
and make it, wireless.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
You're good.
I don't know why this thing is so difficult to work. Okay, we'll come back to this, but this is from Ephesians. Ephesians was a church that Paul loved probably the most. He's most effusive about his compliments with them. They supported him when he was in prison. So he's giving them a blessing towards the end of Ephesians. He says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of God's power. Put on the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to stand against the arrows of the devil. For our struggle, this is the key part, is not against blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, comes back to the armor image, take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on the evil day and have prevailed against everything and standing firm. So we have to get the context of what these scriptures are reading. And what was the context? Paul is using the image of a Roman soldier and his armor, I should say, as an image of preparation. Why this battle imagery?
To get into the conversation. Forgive you.
Let's take it.
So, I think that is two different things. Take this off. In today's world, some people are saying the government is doing too much, and they're working against the government. Others say the government should be doing more. So people can interpret this whichever way they want to these days. But in those days, of course, the Romans were taking over and they had all the armor and they had all the spears and all the rest of that. So people could easily picture.
And they were really going against the good of the community. They were,
Right.
Really, stealing everything.
They were also an external force, which is a lot easier to fight than
In the
internal conflict.
Right.
Internal conflicts are much more challenging.
That's right.
External
That's
force.
right, yeah.
Easy to quit figure at too.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You think you
It make
can
the,
get rid of the external, but
yeah.
it's hard to get rid of the
It's,
internal.
Well, Rome controlled everything. Rome controlled everything.
Yeah.
Well, just in general, so many things have been displaced, I think, and going back to what you said, just a general observation, not about good and evil, but like male, female roles, or like what we're designed biologically to do, or just to even socialize, the digital technology, for example, so. Yeah, you're right, it was very different back then than it is now. How do we affect it now?
But I think Rome did many good things.
Mhm.
I mean, things weren't exactly peachy before Rome.
Or after Rome either.
Or afterward. It was the Roman peace, what do you call it, Pax Romana.
Peace through victory.
Yeah, I mean, it may have not have been.
Peace through victory, through strength,
That's
peace
the-
through,
peace through conquest.
they had, someone said there's force from God's power, there's power, there's economic, political,
Roads,
military.
Drinking.
yeah.
It seemed to me
Yeah.
that a lot of, I've recently come to think about sin as being more corporate. But I think if you look at corporate structure, whether it's political or economic or whatever, there could be a lot of really good aspects to it that really promote the environment, promote the well-being of everybody. But there can also be this negative side where,
In Romans, Paul points that out. Says we need to have respect for the authorities because they keep order. But that's about where it ended. Because keep in mind, Rome maintained their power economically. So they would take over a nation who there'd be a lot of killing. And then to stabilize it, they would take the leaders they thought they could work with, heavily reward them with great wealth and control. And then they say, well, can't beat them, join them. And then, so economically and politically, that's how they did things. And they took all that wealth, most of it ended up in Rome, lots of it, huge pieces of it. But when there would be social unrest, guess what they would do? Nice little release of a lot of grain goes a long way, putting bread on people's table, settling things down. Some people think, by the way, John Wesley did this in England, that when his conversion people to Methodism, that there might have been revolution. And the Industrial Revolution was beginning to heat up, and so sometimes social worker can be a way of controlling the masses and keeping their place, but we still need to take all the money.
So are you talking of like the concept of Olympic Games? I read somewhere like the history of the Olympic Games or just competition.
So everything, see, anything can be used.
Like if something's
Yeah.
unstable in the government, they distract people by,
Right,
creating some kind of competition or.
and I'm not saying that's bad, obviously, I'm glad we have food stamps. But this was how they worked though. And militarily, they would absolutely decimate, punish,
Bread and circus.
so intimidating.
We call the bread and circuses concept. Wasn't that a way of pacifying the masses?
Right. It's all these things, and so, and at all these levels, Christians were in conflict. Why were Christians in conflict? Why Rome accepted all these, they take over a nation, they say, we respect your gods. We'll put your God in, we'll have statues put to your God in Rome, and you can put our statue of Caesar here. Remember, Caesar Augustus was deified.
Wasn't that the basic no for Christians? One God, anyway.
Right.
Sure wasn't Caesar.
See, we couldn't,
Argument.
you're not gonna bow down to Caesar. Caesar's God, and the terms again are the same as for Jesus. The one who brings peace, the one who brings justice. He's the Prince of Peace. He's the Lord of Lords. And those Christians believe, no, that is not what we think. And economically, Christians, remember, didn't eat the meats. Many times they didn't eat the meat sacrificed, because particular things would be sacrificed to God, then be resold. We make our sacrifice. Now let's sell it. Christians say, no, it's been sacrificed to a God. So many Christians just simply wouldn't do it. Well, what do you think that happens when the virgins, all these people become Christian, they're no longer eating our meats? So it was an economic threat to them. Or they don't keep the holidays. We have all these holidays, why don't they come and have fun with us and have the holidays? And, if we don't pay tribute to these gods, bad things are gonna happen. These Christians are they're holding out. The gods are gonna be mad at us because these Christians are blowing them off. And if that's true, Christians became a threat. Now, there wasn't constantly persecution. It was in spotty in places in certain times. Some places were rather peaceful, depending on the magistrate in the area. So these are things that caused terrible things to happen. When Paul wrote this letter to the Ephesians, he was in prison. So when he uses soldiers' imagery, it makes sense. His image, everyone understood. But he transforms that imagery in Ephesians into one of peace. It's a sword of truth. It's the helmet of faith. It's the breastplate of God. So all these things, it's no longer a violent image. It is an image of spiritual power. Because he believed that there are forces in this world that are likened to a battle that's taking place within heaven. So it's been brought down it's incarnated in the various economic powers, political power, the military power, but just as importantly, the ideological power that drove all that. Does that make sense? What you think ideologically backs up the powers. Now, this is true even in capitalism. I'm a capitalist myself, okay? However, I'm a very big and modified capitalist, because I think capitalism, pure capitalism, probably is brutal.
Right.
and greed. But you can mix capitalism with other ways of working things. And how people work that out, I don't know, a lot of opinions. I believe in political parties. I think they're very helpful. I also believe Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Greens, whatever you call yourself, are under God's judgment. I think they are all in some way corrupt. Now, I may have to make a choice between the two, but, and you have to make a choice, and according to your own understanding. But I think Christians' allegiances to any one power, your first allegiance is to God. A God who wants to create a more just, peaceful, compassionate nation. And we're gonna bring peace between us and peace in this world.
And that's the reason why I don't vote for all the Democrats or all the Republicans. When people are running for office, I want to, my idea is to judge, okay, this guy is running for office and he's on the take. And this guy,
Right.
he is really straight and he has a record of being just right there and doing the right things and so on. That's the guy I'm gonna vote for. I don't care what party he's in.
Right.
That's the guy I'm gonna vote for.
You know, but I think that's my point here is precisely that we all are trying to work and stay within the ideas and values of God's kingdom, which are generosity, which are a sense of justice, especially for those who are weak and powerless. There may be a lot of ways to approach that. I have some good Republican friends say, look, you know, I remember Bill Clinton, saying, well, we're doing it longer as it was. Some truth, there was some truth in my mind when we had welfare. There were people wouldn't get married. You know, there were problems with welfare. It kind of bred some dependency that wasn't always helpful. So the Republicans were quick to point that out, and I think they had a lot of truth in that. When we worked with Centuria and the family we worked with, some of us were more conservative, some of us were more progressive. We all changed our minds about a lot of things.
We opened our eyes a lot.
Guys opened our eyes a lot. And one of the, you know, it didn't just change the family we were working, it changed us. I mean, I can remember Marla calling up Centuria, when we tried to, she tried to get an apartment, we're trying to get an apartment, she lived in Evanston. And the guy said, called her and said, well, we don't have anything available.
Yeah, Marla and I discovered redlining firsthand.
And we don't have anything available. And then Marla told me, oh, yeah, we've got several choices for you to look at. Or we went to the bank. Well, you know, we're not gonna, they didn't want to open an account, just a basic checking account for Centurion. Marla had to go to battle. She had to put on the armor of God here, man. It's very sort of true. You do this for everyone? This is the way you treat everyone who sits down here? Is it because she's black? I don't know if she was that forward, but that's what the message got. They finally opened an account. But there are systems in the world that have eaten away at the good. And I think, when I think about Satan, and I do think there were forces in the world that are very destructive, and it's backed up mostly by the ideologies. So you have to question the ideology. Is this ideology helpful or is it destructive? And, you know, we probably all got ideologies that we believe. You know, my racial attitudes, I was infused with them as a kid. I think this culture picked them up. And I had to learn some things.
Think about the whole idea of slavery to begin with. You know, using these people to build our country, you know, basically free labor, and all the mess that is created from that ideology.
Right.
So how does all this get Back to lead us not into temptation, right?
And because what we contend with, Paul says, is not just something we can take on individually. That's the point of Paul. We do not have the power. We are overwhelmed by, this. But he says, we have to keep in mind that there is a God at work in us, that good is always at work in the world through the power of God and at work in us. And that's true. We wouldn't be here if it was just all evil. I mean, we would have been gone a long time ago. I mean, you think about it. How many acts of goodness personally and socially enable the creation to keep going?
If you think about slavery, you think about all those abolitionists and all those people who ran the
Right.
that, I mean,
They
that
made a
really became a
difference.
power.
So there's power of truth, power of having faith and believing in hope. Think about Martin Luther King Jr.
Mhm.
How did people survive 400 years of slavery? And then what came after it? 400 years. Indentured Native Americans, indentured blacks, some indentured whites were poor for a time, and then swiftly everyone brought slaves in from Africa. How did they survive it? That's really a miracle of incredible, when you think about it. I have this, I grew up being taught the inferiority of black somehow in the culture I live in. I look at it the other way around now. I think, boy, there's strength there I never had, that we've never had.
They had belief, they had faith,
Oh, my goodness.
they had
Way
faith
more
that things would get
sense of
better in the next
That,
life.
many people in the African American community have great faith and in both Muslim and Christian faith. So I just, I think this whole thing about the kingdom of God is, it is, we are confronting other kingdoms. And this is true on a major social level. So I don't know if I can get this to move again. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, just go to the next, press the next slide now. Just press it.
Speaking of
Evil is social in many ways is more powerful than destructive. Now, here's how that works. I want you, if you want to think about this, think about an individual cannot get by with certain things, but a group of people with an ideology can. I always wondered how in the world did all those good German Lutherans, so many of them become a part of the Nazi party and behind that ideology. How did that happen?
Self-preservation,
Excuse me?
self-preservation.
Yeah. So say more about that, Lord.
Well, I think you have, all these young men and ever going into the army. If they didn't, their family would be hurt.
Right.
Same in, with the kamikaze pilots.
Yeah, there's great movies which shows that dynamic. Somebody who doesn't want to go, and what did they do?
Wipe out the family.
Then you got Bonhoeffer, who stands against it. We had a speaker here once that did an impersonation of Bonhoeffer. He was an actor, a wonderful experience. But the other thing is the ideology. I mean, remember how down and out Germany was? Frankly,
and it was the Marshall Plan, Second World War, corrected the errors of what the First World War,
First World War,
that famous railroad car, will squash Germany, and that's what started it up. You had to have a wheelbarrow of German marks to buy a pair of shoes in the early 20s. It was impossible, and this poverty led
and it's
to
no
someone
wonder,
saying,
it's
"I
no
can
wonder.
save you," and that was Hitler.
And then he came up and said, I want, and he did.
Sure.
Economically, they became strong.
Yeah.
Military, they became
You
He
can't
led
fall
them,
through
so,
the
They
table.
became strong because of conscripted labor though.
right,
They didn't.
Well, it's all- I'm not saying it's right.
There was more to it than just Hitler's making.
but there is,
Sure, but the
but the point is that an individual could never justify the atrocities that happened, or slavery. Or even when I was growing up in youth group, we had this young woman, she was very short. I mean, this is a small thing, you know, on a more personal level. But we all joked to no end. We'd all, you know, everyone stand up and someone would say, she'd stand up and the rest of us sing something. And we'd say, oh, stand up, Vicky. And we called her Mouse.
Was she black?
No, it was white friend. We grew up together. And you know, I realized that really belittled her. She's now a district superintendent.
There
At
you
the
go.
Methodist Church, and she and I were asked to do our senior pastor's funeral down in Mississippi, and I went down and one of the first things is, Vicky, I owe you an apology. I am sorry for all those times. And we just put you down about your shortness. Oh, that's okay, I'll always forgive it about it. I said, yeah, but I know it was hurtful. And I participated in that. So it's not like this is just some, you know, it's all microcosm and there's the large experience of it. We all have a way of participating by it. We're looking at body image stuff now with people. It's just, and now we're beginning to realize, you know, it's not all about personal initiative, getting overweight. It's about genetics. It's about food desert that we have now. And so we're beginning to start looking all those times we say those comments, that person sure is fat. She ought to get control of her diet, or he ought to get control of his diet. We have some sense of personal responsibility is important, of course, but it's not just about that. So I'm just saying there are forces of things that we participate or we choose not to participate in. And I think that's what the prayer comes back to. Lead us not into a place of participation in things that will destroy the human good.
I was just thinking about, why isn't the focus on doing good as opposed to opposing evil or temptation? And then I was thinking, well, the beginning of the prayer is focused on heaven on earth and God's will and those things.
Bringing God's rule, God's way on the earth. In some ways, this is it is kind of the other side of it, Paul. It's the turning it.
Harold's a psychologist. Is it better to tell someone to be good or to resist evil?
Much more, it's stronger
Or to not be good, or to
Give
not be
people-
bad?
people ideas of what they should be doing.
You always want to be
It gives
forced
you
something
a goal.
against something.
That you have that in the center of your mind, otherwise, if you say the negative, then you have that in the center of your mind, so people tend
So you need the
to
positive goal.
hone in on that.
Well, you don't know what you should do if you're against something.
Right,
If you tell
exactly. So you need to really guide.
Yeah.
But I think what Paul, I just reminded Paul, is what he said to begin with, is that God is a supporter, a guide. So if you can hold on to that, the ideas that we're taught, that's exactly what we're talking about, the good. And that can be our light.
But we have to think about the good for the whole, and not just the good for me.
Right.
Right.
And
That
that's
becomes
what's Christian
difficult, though.
community.
Who is the whole? So this is, it used to be before the worldliness got so apparent, the good was our country. Now it's the world,
It's the
and
world.
that's
It's the
creating
planet.
huge problems.
Right.
For countries now, because how do you distribute the wealth in your country if you're supposed to help the whole world? You know, how do you control your borders? How do you, this is becoming, I think.
They're very complex problems.
The problems are more complex than they used to be 40 years ago.
And you have the politics because you might want to do the right thing. But if you do, you're politically dead.
Yeah.
If you do what?
You know, it's hard.
If you do the right thing, you do the right thing.
Right, but that's
Yeah.
just individual power. That's gone.
Right,
If you, because you're putting yourself out of the whole.
right. I'll tell you something interesting, right? The power of individual is can be amazing. I always think back to Saint Francis, in a time the church was so corrupt, and the theology was not always so good. And he didn't really invent a new theology. Now, later Franciscans did more theological thinking. He just decided he was just gonna live it. Because that's what no one was doing. No one was giving an example of radical living the faith. He really transformed, you know, in some ways transformed the church and brought, even almost brought peace between the Muslims and the Christians.
Who was that?
Saint Francis.
Mhm.
He dared to walk across the battlefield and talk to, I forget not the imam, but the great leader of the Muslims. And talked with him about his faith. And they almost killed him, but they had guys said, no, when they talked to him, they fed him food. They had these rich conversations together for several days. And he learned a lot from the Muslim faith by doing that. He had judgments too about it. He realized they pray 5 times a day. We don't even do that. And he began to realize they're not the vicious people. He's been taught that there are good things about these people. And apparently he got something because they defeated the Christians, had them surrounded, could have decimated and wiped them out. But he said, give them food and tell them to go home. That's what the Muslim leader did. So in some ways, whereas it didn't really bring full peace, it ended with war, the Christians losing. But in some ways, he practiced what St. Francis had shared with him.
We'll conquer you and then help you.
Excuse me?
We'll conquer you and then help you.
We'll conquer you, and then we're gonna show mercy. Because, you know, his faith talks about the mercy of Allah. So I'm just saying, individual faith, just living the faith is in itself a witness to something very powerful. And I think St. Francis, some think he's the second best human being ever lived on the earth. Well, I don't know about that. Who can
He
judge
really
that?
exemplified that.
But he's certainly exemplified. That's why oftentimes he's a stand-in for Christ when there's pictures of the Trinity, at least St. Francis being the Christ figure. I had a painting I gave to my last church before I left. I got from a CC. It was chosen for the year to be the painting to represent the CC. And it was St. Francis looking at God and the Holy Spirit as a bird over his head. Because St. Francis was the stand-in, the one who got the crucifix. And you know, he said they've gotten these wounds. So anyway, I'm just saying that this is it brings us back to the personal, because the personal is very important. We can be peacemakers in the world and terrible human beings at home. Or we can be terrible, really good human beings at home and just horrendous in our social attitudes. And we find it all there confusing. I find supporting what's going on in Europe, the war that's taking place, I find it a massive conflict in me. Because they've been, as an aggressive thing is happening to them, and I feel like we ought to support them. But there's another part of me that just wonders, because I know every time you have a war that vicious and you keep feeding it, the generational pain and suffering is going to be there anyway. So I just let them quandary sometimes what I think. I guess I'm a reluctant non-pacifist. Because I think you can't see someone being abused and killed without doing something, but it's a question I just don't have resolved any at all. Maybe I'll never will.
And part of the problem is, if you don't resist evil, it's like rot extending. Having won, let's go on to the next.
Right.
And that will continue unless something In other words, acceptance of evil is evil in itself,
Right,
and that's where the problem
that's
is.
true, but, you know, I
Overcoming
would,
evil with good.
but what you resist persist, and I think there's some truth to that too. It's interesting, Jesus taught not turning the other cheek and things like that, and I used to think, well, he was pacifist. I'm not so sure you can translate what he did in his own situation to an ideology where pacifism is the way. But I will say this, he gave a third alternative no one had. One was to come and be demeaned and defeated. The other was to stand up and fight. Both ended in the same terribly. So he said, no, you have your integrity and you turn the other cheek as an act of defiance, but you don't strike back. Strikes me as in his situation, the best solution that they had to defeat evil, to speak against evil. So I just think there is this richness in Christianity. To see if there is there a third way that we can take as a people. Practicing justice and peace before the problem comes up may alleviate a war that could come down, like we were talking about earlier, World War II. What if after World War I, there had been a peaceful solution that didn't humiliate Germany?
With a quite
Needless-
different result.
You may have had very different results. So, I don't know, it's the right question. So I want to look at something else here. Uh-oh.
You have to bring that
Pull
bar
down the bar.
To pull out to the.
Yeah.
There you
So this brings us, when we got to personal, this brings us to the early church, the early monastics.
Now, we can't read the fine print, some of us.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Could read them, please.
These were these were developed over several centuries. Starting with the early monastic. There were monastics who started to retreat from the world because they felt like they couldn't live their faith fully in the world. So they retreated from the world, and when Christianity converted Constantine, and Constantine became Christian, and 2 emperors later, the nation, the Roman Empire became Christian. Everyone was pouring into the churches, and they felt there was a lot lost in really living the faith. It got compromised. Some people say when Constantine became Christian, Christianity became pagan. There's some truth to that. So these were developed as a guide for the Christian life. Lust, a disordered love for something or someone, blown about by a hurricane when symbolized by a lack of control. It's like a hurricane wind. So it's not that the desire and hunger and sexual feelings obviously are a good gift of God, but is to be out of control to the point that it no longer sees the humanity of the other person. Gluttony, a constant need to consume more than we need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad would say, well, your eyes are bigger than your stomach.
Yeah, but my dad said the same thing. I like it. Greed, again, it's kind of like gluttony, never enough, an inability to feel satisfied.
Yeah.
To the point of taking more than is needed, without consideration of others.
Quite a few years ago, before Carol was in my life, BC, I went and visited my uncle in Allentown, Pennsylvania, who was running a little factory, and it was unionized, and he told me, well, you know, he said, well, I asked the union leader, we just gave him a raise. What else did he want? Oh, he wants more.
Right, so, you know, Greek, there again, every institution has its good and evil, and unions do too.
What's the next?
The next one is sloth. Now, I always thought that was laziness, that's
Right.
really not the real meaning of it, the real meaning is just no longer to care, to be indifferent. I mean, one of the worst things someone can do is not be angry, get mad, you just don't want to. I mean, you think about it, you're in a marriage and you're with someone who goes to a town but isn't rageful and angry at you, or you're angry or rageful at them and you're fighting and there's still passion there. But what happens when it's like, I just don't care anymore? I could care less what it's.
Total disengagement,
Excuse me?
total disengagement.
Total disengagement.
Actually, it's a denial of the existence of the other person.
Right. And you as a therapist, we've done couples counseling, but we see that in someone it is one of the toughest things to help someone ever overcome. Is that you gotta find something deep and people are just, depression can do that for you too. Envy. Comparing ourselves to others.
Oh, yeah.
Or what others have.
They have,
The sideward glance that we take is something to everybody else. You know, some would say that parable of Jesus, remember the tax collector praying in the temple, and then there's a Pharisee, and you say, oh, I thank God I'm not like this tax collector.
Right.
And the tax collector is begging God for forgiveness, and only the tax collector goes away forgiven according to Jesus. That's what Jesus said. Two ways to interpret the parable, but the way Luke interprets it, and the real issue is the sidelong glance, because the Pharisee is looking and comparing, I do a lot better than he does, man.
I can't hear you.
I do a lot better than he does. I do a lot better than that old tax collector who's robbing and stealing people. I tithe everything I got, and I pay a double tax on everything, and I give to the poor, and I don't commit adultery, and boy, I'm not like this man. And but it's really a problem when we live our lives in comparison. I think, you know, that we survived middle school is amazing because we're.
That's right. It is amazing.
I'm watching my son, he's always thinking about what other people think about him and how people feel about him, and you know.
Facebook makes it worse.
Oh, it's just so obviously, it's so oppressive. You know. And we can live in misery thinking, well, they're doing so much better than me. Or why does their family always gets to go to European vacations, and you know, we have to go up to just Michigan only for a weekend. You know, or why, you know, they're building a really nice house. I'd like to have one of those.
It usually comes from, I'm sorry to put in my 2 cents, but it usually what irks me is that it mostly comes from people who can actually do something about that situation. Like, but choose not to,
Yeah.
like I know somebody, and instead of like, making, you know, business and connections with these people that are in his life, he had the dossier. He had the whole file system on them, how much they hurt him. And like all he, throughout his whole life, he goes, like, this is from Wolof, he's from Wolof family, and so are they, but.
Listening.
Remembers what something like, he's like retired, but remembers how like somebody like hit him with an umbrella, or like let his bunny die when he was 13 or something like that. So it's just like, to that point, that's just like, that what gets me. If you can even do something about the situation.
Hey, he's losing himself. Yeah.
Wow.
Like that, just,
Very painful to
that's
watch that.
sick. So I just like try to stay away as much as possible from people like that, so.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And that last one is what?
Pride, not needing a higher power. I am the end all, man. I am above it. Not needing anyone else. Feeling like I can do this on my own. No one's gonna help me. I can do it better than everyone. I mean, it's the superiority.
Scary about it. It's true.
Yeah, no, sometimes it's true too.
There's one more under
They
pride.
should just.
The last one is wrath.
Yeah, there is.
More than that, anger is a gift from God, believe me. If you don't have your anger, you won't make it very far in this world. You've got to be able to draw boundaries. Anger tells you what matters to you, what you want. Anger serves two good purposes, to defend and to keep us in touch with what really matters. I'm angry because that didn't happen, or I'm angry because, that did happen. So these are the traditional lists. They are thought to be really a negation of the good. Lust abuses one's desire to be drawn to others, to merge. That's a good desire. Gluttony abuses our good desire to eat. Greed abuses one's good desire to have what we need. Sloth abuses one's good desire to not be overly invested. Sometimes we can take on the whole world. We can't do that. We can't care about everything. Envy abuses one's desire to have what we want or need.
Yeah.
Because it's good to recognize what I like and what I don't like. I used to have an exercise for people who didn't have a good sense of themselves. One of the exercises was to say, spend the day, every hour, they'd say, I like this, I don't like that. I like this, I don't like that. Because that's a developmental stage that some people skip. Wrath abuses one's good desire to protect ourselves. Pride abuses our desire to feel competent and valuable. So, see if we can get one last slide here. So, what are the cures of the 7 deadly sins? These are ones I came up with. For lust, it's reverence. Reverence for the other as a whole person. Gluttony, it's having a sense of abundance and fullness. There is enough.
What is that?
Having abundance, having a sense of I'm full, there's enough here. I don't need all this to be satisfied. Greed is to be generous. Sloth is to have compassion. Envy is to be a people who are at peace with who I am and what my life is about. Wrath is forgiveness. Pride is humility. So, last question, and I'm going to leave this with you because I got to get going. What is one temptation which you can commit to contend with in this coming week or two? I'm going to pray a prayer that it's my favorite prayer from St. Claus. It's simply that you keep your eyes open if you wish. Take from me all that takes me from you. Bring to me all that brings me close to you. Take me from myself that I may behold yours.